So, if memory serves, this is your daily drinker.
It's a daily drinker, yeah. Old Forester 100 is.
Well, what goes into a daily drinker?
A lot, actually. So in this world, your daily drinker is going to be something that you can, number one, afford. You don't mind drinking, it doesn't have to be every
What do
day.
you usually define as affordability?
So it depends. So for me, in this economy, it's a 25-ish to $30 bottle.
Per 750 milliliters.
Yeah, 750. So that's something you don't mind, just sipping neat. You don't mind putting over the rocks if you're in the mood. You don't mind making an old fashioned. Just kind of whatever. It's sort of something that's good, that's affordable. This is a $25 bottle, at least here in Central Texas. This is let's call it sub $50 bottle.
I think it's 48 after tax.
Yeah, so depending on who you get it from. It just, it's one of those things, you can do a lot of different things, but it just kind of makes sense. Like it hits all the buttons, so to speak, right?
What are the buttons?
Well,
what do you want from something that you don't have to think about?
So here's what I like. If you want to sit down with something like this, it's actually pretty complex if you think about it. In the bourbon world, you get a lot of cherry, vanilla, caramel, a little bit of oak, things of that nature. But the nice thing is that it's pretty much the same every single time. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. That's plenty, brother. The people that blend these bourbons, and that's what a lot of people don't understand, is that these things, you get something that's a staple in your life, right? There's nothing with continuity that you can do with that, right? So, they're blending so many different barrels to try to keep a constant flavor profile so that you don't get that flavor drift that you get with single barrels, which is
what you're looking for.
Which is fun with a single barrel, right? But if just something that you can just have after a day of work, something that you've got some friends over that you want to have, and if your friends aren't as, say what you will, educated, enlightened,
or
more
generously, they don't want a very complex relationship with.
Sure, they don't want to think about it. They just want a good, solid drink.
I've heard it be said before. There's a lot of people who don't want the whiskey to get in the way of the Coke.
Yep.
The Coca-Cola.
Yeah, that happens in the rum world a lot too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So they don't want the Coke to get in the way of the rum, which is why rum is what it is. We'll get into that later in other conversations that we have. But as far as dailies go, it just depends.
Why Old Forester 100?
For me,
because it's complex. Because
it
has enough going on.
Yeah, for me it hits all the parts.
Because I know some people, they make their daily like very old Barton, but I've tried it and it doesn't really have anything going on.
And that's fine. In my humble opinion, that's fine. You can, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Whatever you like, the way you like it.
Of course.
And you've heard it and you yell at me for saying it, but, if you like it the way you like it, that's fine. For me, Old Forester 100 is one of those whiskeys that if you want to sit down and you want to pick it apart, it's there to pick apart. Like, it's a great whiskey. It's, like I said before, cherry and oak and vanilla. And there's nothing that's just great Kentucky bourbon, right? It's just great. But if you want to make a cocktail with it, if you want to put it over ice, if, you want somebody that wants a whiskey and cola, this at 100 proof is fantastic just because you still get, as opposed to the typical whiskeys that you would drink with a whiskey and cola or a whiskey and water,
Like
or
Jack Daniel's #7.
and that's fine. But at 100 proof, you're still going to get whiskey flavor, right? And I always said that at the store, especially with old fashions. For me, the higher the proof of the whiskey you were pouring in your old fashioned, the more whiskey you were going to get in the cocktail that you're drinking, which for a lot of people just didn't. It was like, holy crap, no kidding. And I'm like, yeah, because at the end of the day, when we drink whiskey, we want to taste what the whiskey has to offer.
Otherwise, you would pour a neutral grain spirit or.
Sure, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you want a neutral grain spirit, and a tonic water, that's fine.
Have at it.
Yeah, and I'm cool with that. Like, have fun with that. But if you really are interested in whiskey, it's something like this for me. And everybody's going to be different. It could be a Buffalo Trace product.
Well, it should be noted that even given the value that it is, I think the Old Forester 100 is only $2 more than Old Forester 86, which is their standard offering.
Sure. And if you're just literally getting into whiskey and you've never gotten into whiskey before,
I bought a few people bottles of Old Forester 86 because the Old Forester 100 scared them.
Well, because for a lot of people, the proof is that's a huge jump, huge. If you're just getting into whiskey, then I would obviously suggest, which I have, to a lot of people, an Old Forester 86, just because it's...
Or a tin cup. I hear good things about tin cup.
Yeah, they're probably one of the better offerings at a lower proof. So you could get into drinking that with some sort of additional, anything, whether it be soda, I'd say soda, I'd say cola, but you could do like tonic water or whatever. But
and theoretically, you could mix it with root beer, but I don't know who would do that.
You can do whatever you want, Sprite, ginger ale. Like, there's a lot of cocktails out there that, that ginger ale or like a Sprite product is something that people drink. But, for me, I'm not a huge fan just because, I'm not Winston Churchill. I'm not trying to water stuff down and drink all day long every day. But
there've been theories about that because, as you know, for most of human history, most of the beverages that we drank had some alcohol in them.
Sure.
But it stands to reason that everyone wasn't wandering around drunk all the time.
No, and a lot of that had to do with water purity. Believe it or not.
Yes, it did. Yes,
From
it did.
all the stuff that I've read, it was just the water was so tainted that they had to have alcohol in it to try to purify the water.
But of course, it was only a little bit because otherwise you'd be wandering around drunk. Like in Athens, when they would have slightly homoerotic conversations with each other, they would have these big vats of wine, but the wine would be watered down.
Sure.
It would be a very low
Alcohol content. Sure, and that makes sense to me. But when you're talking about a daily drinker, you're just talking about something that, number one, you enjoy, and two, you enjoy it in multiple ways. So this is a great product for somebody that's, that wants to drink it neat. Obviously, we drink it neat, a lot.
Although I haven't known to throw an ice cube in it when it's really hot outside.
Yeah, in the Texas heat, there's nothing wrong with that. If you have like a big ice cube.
In the Texas heat and the skeeters.
Yeah, we got a lot of skeeters, that's for
We
sure.
got a lot of skeeters. They were trying to get in my window the other day.
Yeah, they're trying to get in the house every freaking day. But Old Forester 100 is just, for me, it's a sweet spot. It's got a great proof, number one. Number two,
It's also very sweet.
Yeah, if you want to pick it apart, you can. But for me, the big thing is after a hard day at work and you want to come home and just have a cocktail.
Like you want to throw together a Boulevardier or a Old Fashioned or a Manhattan.
Sure, it works well, super well with that. If you just want to drink it neat, when you're watching TV with your wife or your husband or whatever, it's got enough going on because of the proof.
Mm-hmm.
Where the 86 is great, it's so low proof that
You lose, like you said, you lose a lot of the whiskey flavor.
you do, because it's been watered down so much. Now, if you know, what I used to tell people at the store is if I'd rather proof it down myself.
Yeah. But
So,
a lot of people, they're not inclined towards that. They'd rather have it proofed down already.
and that's fine. And if that's the way you want it, then that's cool. Then drink it 86 proof. But for me, obviously, because we've talked before, I'm a little bit of a proof hound.
Mm-hmm.
So at 100 proof, drinking it neat is fine. It's just perfect for me. If I had a perfect proof, it'd be, you know, if I'm just drinking it every day, it's 100, 105. It's perfect. You know, but if, you know, you want to add an ice cube to it in a Texas heat, at least for us, right? Then these glasses wouldn't work. But in a rocks glass with one of our whiskey ice cubes that we have, and a good 2 ounces, 2.5 ounces of, you know, Old Forester 100, by the time it's proofed down, you still get all the enjoyment of the whiskey, and you still get the flavor of it. Or if you make an old fashioned, and we'll get into this in our rye episode, you know, rye works really well in old fashions just because of the spiciness.
Rye also works in Manhattans for a similar reason.
For the same idea, right? Because you're adding water and sugar and bitters and, you know, whatever you're adding to it, but the rye spice, because it's so spicy, it stands up. And I always told people at the store, if you're going to go with bourbon, go with a higher proof bourbon. If you're going to make like an old fashioned or a Manhattan or something like that, because if you really want, I mean, let's be honest, if you're just going to drink old fashions to get hammered, then it really doesn't matter, right?
I'd say pick the least expensive thing. Get yourself some,
Sure.
what's it called? Canada's Finest.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And if that's what your intentions are, then that's great. But if you still want to taste bourbon or you want to taste whiskey,
It serves to have a higher proof bourbon or rye whiskey in there because you're already going to be watering it down with
correct.
the syrup or the sweet vermouth in the case of a Manhattan.
Yep.
And you're probably serving it over ice, so that's
That's going to water it down also. So if you really want to taste the whiskey, then I think a higher proof whiskey, even something at 100 proof,
it gives it just a little more edge.
just gives it a little more oomph. And if you're curious about whiskey, right, which we talked about, then that makes it interesting, right? Then it just adds that additional flavor. And, you know, you can take something like 100 proof whiskey, even if you're a, you know, 80 to 90 proof person that drinks whiskey. By the time you add all your ingredients, well, you're still sort of drinking the same proof, right? But you're getting additional flavor because you didn't already start off at the rock bottom, which in the whiskey world is 80 proof.
Mm-hmm.
Like bourbon can't be less than 80 proof, and that's just the way that it goes. Like that's just the rule. So if you're, you know, starting at 80 proof, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you're starting at 80 proof and you like your,
But you're not giving it much room to express itself when you mix it together with bitters,
Fair.
And syrup, and sweet vermouth.
yeah, fair. But if that's your starting point, then start there. Start with an Old Forester 86. You know, start with something. You know, starting with 80 proof is kind of tough because now you're drinking 70 or 60. But
I'd say stick around 90 if you're just starting out.
yeah, but then I'd be a hypocrite because when I started drinking whiskey, I was drinking.
You were drinking Fireball.
I was drinking 80 proof stuff and ice. So, but not at, you know, that's just kind of the way that it works out. So
there is an ideal way to go about it, but of course you're at liberty to do whatever you want.
yeah, you do whatever you want. But for me, I used to tell people that, you know, if you could start off at, especially if you're making cocktails, start off at 90 proof. If you can bump it up to 100 proof, you know, add a little bit more water, add a little bit more whatever you want to, you know, add to make the cocktail the way you like it. And I think you'll get a little more appreciation of actually the bourbon, which is the whole point. I mean, obviously, for me, it's the whole point. You know, if you're just trying to get ripped, it doesn't matter what you're drinking, whether it's drinking vodka or gin or anything else.
But the second you step beyond, I want to get hammered drunk.
Yeah, and I want to appreciate the cocktail. I want to appreciate the whiskey, right? I want to appreciate the experience.
That's where your advice comes in.
That's where I come in, where it's like, well, then let's add a little bit of proof, and let's tamper that down with the simple syrup. Let's tamper that down with the bitters, right? Because we've been to a place. We're not going to say where it was, because no disrespect, but it was a fantastic distillery. But their old fashions were so overbittered.
Yes, they were.
Yeah, it was terrible.
That was a shame
because all you tasted was the bitters.
I think we were so bothered by it that we came back and made better old fashions.
Yeah, we actually came back and made better old fashions at home.
It was for my uncle, because he was so torn up about not having a good old fashioned.
Yeah, and that was just one of those things, and that's the thing with cocktails. If you can find the right mixologist, you know, they do a phenomenal job. But you find the wrong mixologist and they add too much of one ingredient, and one ingredient takes over. So if you're doing it at home,
well, especially with the bitters, it's a very fine line from this is perfect to this is the.
When they say 2 dashes of bitters, they literally mean 2 dashes. And if you're doing, you know, more than that, that's all you're tasting.
2 very, very small flicks like this. I mean, you can maybe get away with 1, but the second you go, it's over.
You're in trouble. So, you know, and that's where the mixologists come in, and the really good ones are really good for a reason, you know. But at the end of the day, you know, what I used to tell people at the store was, you know, especially when they're talking about making like old fashions or Manhattans or something like that, it's like, you want to taste the bourbon, because that's the main driver of the whole thing, right? You don't want to.
It's the most complex ingredient. It'd be like if you were making ramen and the broth wasn't anything special.
No,
it was a weak broth.
That's a good point. Yeah, if the broth sucks, then no matter how they could be hand pulled noodles.
Have you heard of WABS?
No.
Weak ass broth syndrome.
Well, that's fair. Yeah. But it goes on the same point though, is that if the broth sucks, then no matter how good the noodles are,
I mean, you'll still have a halfway decent, you know, concoction of noodles and vegetables and hard-boiled egg and the whole 9 yards, but it's going to be lacking that oomph because you're missing it. Basically, when you use it too low of a proof bourbon or whiskey or anything in a cocktail, you're just having simple syrup mixed with bitters, which is fine.
But you can do that without bourbon, though.
Yeah, you can make a mocktail.
Sure, absolutely. You can use.
Save yourself the money if you're gonna do it that way. Get some vodka and mix it together with simple syrup and bitters.
You could. Yeah, it's not the greatest, but yeah, you could. But
that's basically what you're doing when you go a low proof bourbon, because it's gonna be watered down so much.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. But with that being said, it just if you like your old fashions, if you like your Manhattans,
you owe it to yourself to use a higher proof bourbon.
I think
with
so.
Forester 100. You'll have a better time.
I think so. And it doesn't have to be Old Forester, but it could be any 100 proof bourbon. Smoke Wagon has a small batch that's 100 proof. There's a lot of whiskey out there.
I'm very fond of Smoke Wagon small batch.
As am I. And
you can go Wild Turkey 101. That'd be a good start.
That's a great start too. Any Kentucky bourbon that's 100 proof, you know, you can kind of play with it.
What about rye? I mean, you could go the Old Forester rye or.
Well, that's one of the things, and we'll get into that in another episode. Yeah, we're going to do a 2-part episode of rye whiskey, but you know, traditionally, at least for me, rye whiskey stands up better in a mixed cocktail.
I think so, because the flavors of bourbon blend together more with simple syrup.
Yeah, and
so it becomes kind of homogenous.
They get lost a little bit. And if you go to Kentucky, from everything that I haven't been, full disclosure, we will go. Haven't been to Kentucky yet, but old fashions in Kentucky are made with bourbon. Now, for me, old fashions made with bourbon tend to be awful sweet. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? You've got bourbon that's already going to be sweet.
Brown sugar junction.
Yep. And then you're going to add simple syrup,
which is sweet.
And you're going to add bitters, which change the whole dynamic of the whole recipe. But you've got sweet, and then you got bitters. Where with rye whiskey,
you have spicy sweet.
Spicy sweet. You got spicy sweet. Yeah, you're right. And then you've got the bitters, right? And then you've got the simple syrup and all that. So it's even more sweet. But the spiciness of the rye stands up to a old fashioned typically a lot better.
Well, like we discussed the other day, it's the reason why 4 grains are so difficult.
So
to manage.
hard to work with.
It's because rye and wheat don't get along.
They don't get along well at all. But in the old fashioned world, if you like a rye old fashioned, you're going to get a lot more whiskey out of that as far as flavor goes, because of because of the rye spice. And I used to tell people at the store that, it's like, what kind of old fashioned do you want? Like, do you want like an ultra sweet? And there's nothing wrong with that, because every fat kid that's ever been in Dairy Queen, right, likes a hyper sweet ice cream, especially with Oreo cookies and shit like that, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want like real complexity, going to a spicier whiskey, you're like, oh, like I'm getting the sweet and the spice. It's like the Japanese with the unami.
Oh yeah.
Right, where you get the sweet and the spicy, or the sweet and the savory, or I'm not that educated on that, but
it's the savory.
Yeah, it's the savory. So you get the mixture of the both, right? Which for me, like if I'm going to take an old fashioned and I can pick which whiskey I get, like for me, I want a high rye whiskey because it's going to stand out, and you're going to actually taste that whiskey with the sweetness of all the stuff that comes with it, right? So, I used to recommend that a lot at the store. If you're going to go old fashions, and same thing though, I would go with a higher proof. Don't go with just a rock bottom 80 proof rye whiskey.
Because the principle holds true. You're still missing out on most of the benefits of rye spice when over 60% of it is not alcohol.
Well, it's proved down so low because of the rules of the whiskey and the bourbon world and the rye world that 80 is basically rock bottom. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine.
And if you're just starting off and you're drinking it neat,
but you're not going to get a lot of that rice. You're not going to get a lot of the rice spice that really makes it unique at 80 proof.
Well, it depends though. So if you've only drank bourbon,
sure,
right? And we're going to get into that in one of the next episodes.
Well, it's a little bit like Scotch in that way, because when you really get into single malts, it helps to start at a lower proof because that malt flavor is so foreign. It's so weird.
It's so different for absolutely sure. Yeah. It's a good, and that's the thing with proof that a lot of people need to understand is that typically the lower the proof, like that's their entry level, right?
The only grain that this might not be the case with is, or commonly used grain, I should say, is wheat, because wheat is pretty approachable regardless of the proof. Yeah,
but remember, the wheat has to do the same rules that bourbon does in America.
Of course.
So a 51% wheat whiskey, there's still a lot of corn, right? So, in America, there's a lot of wiggle room where, like with single malts and blended malts and stuff, and that doesn't mean what you think it means. And we can go into that another time.
I'll hold my.
You know,
I'll wait. I'll wait and hold my
yeah,
breath.
it's
for
a
the Scotch
whole-
spectacular.
It's a whole nother world in Scotch because it just all single malts mean is that they can come from different distilleries.
Can I get you in a waistcoat and pants for the Scotch spectacular?
Maybe. I'll
Okay.
see. I'll see what I can do.
Okay.
Maybe I'll wear a kilt.
Oof.
But yeah, like and blended Scotch. Blended Scotch just means it can be Scotch from different distilleries.
We're getting off track.
Yeah, we're getting off track.
Old Forester. Do you have any strong opinions about Old Forester as a company, as a distillery?
Oh.
How about the rest of them?
Well, Brown Forman is just I love.
They're great. They're consistent.
Yeah, if I have a distillery, Brown Forman is my jam. Brown Forman owns Old Forester. They own Woodford. They own Jack Daniels. So a lot of the stuff you see with Jack Daniels these days, with the exploration of what they're doing, it's. I mean, I don't want to say it, but I think it has a lot to do with Brown Forman.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, in the technology sector, Apple has been aping Microsoft for the entirety of their existence,
Sure.
which is fine.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And then Samsung has been aping Apple.
Right. So Brown Forman is just, as far as what they have, with at least with the 3 distilleries that I know of, it could be more. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I know for a fact that what Brown Forman's doing with Old Forester, with what they're doing with Woodford. Now, Woodford, you could argue they could do more.
They could do more with Woodford.
Yeah, that bottle's almost empty.
So is this one?
Yeah. They got enjoyed quite well.
I am partial to Old Forester, if only because they have one of the few movie tie-in bourbons that I like.
Which is fantastic.
It's quite good. Even though it's sitting at 95 proof,
Yeah.
it's still pretty good.
But Nancy Fraley is she's on record saying that they pick special barrels.
Really?
Yep. They pick special barrels. Now you could argue, and you could inflect it from what she said. I wasn't there, clearly. But what she said was, she insinuated that they were picking special barrels for that particular bottling.
And this, of course, is Old Forester Statesman, which was
Yep.
produced in collaboration with, or in the lead up to Kingsman, the Golden Circle.
Yep, absolutely.
So delightful.
And you can pour you some a little. It's a good. We're almost out, but we'll get some more.
Very light.
But yeah, so in the lead up to that, she basically said that they were picking special barrels, which for a lot of people meant that they were picking, especially at Old Forester, because I've actually done some research on their rick houses. She kind of insinuated, maybe so, maybe not, that she was picking barrels from near the windows.
Oh,
So
really?
those barrels that were getting that direct sunlight all day,
Interesting.
that ages differently, obviously, than barrels that are
Well, that would make sense then
inside
why
the warehouse.
that would make sense then why they decided to proof it down to 95.
Yeah, it might have been a little bit much, from all the heat.
I've seen what happens when you leave a bottle of whiskey in a windowsill.
Yeah, it's not good.
It rots the cork.
It's not good. But in a barrel, it just almost hyper ages it, and she didn't want, this release to just be some nonsense release that
That was phoning it in.
that didn't mean anything. Like, she really cared.
Whoa, that drink's way hotter than it should.
Yeah, it's a great.
I forget how much I like that one.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell by how empty it is. I mean, now granted, that's probably 6 years old, but the fact that it's
The issue with that one is the price point, that it sits at what, $50 all the time.
yeah, it's 50, but it's a good solid whiskey. So if you're gonna have some, if you can afford it for $50, I mean, we just picked up a Redwood Empire,
little something.
something special. We'll go through next time or the time after that.
If anyone was to dethrone Old Forester, because if I had to pick a favorite, it would also be Old Forester. But if anyone was going to dethrone them, it would be Redwood Empire. I really like what Red
Yeah.
Empire is doing, especially now that they have their own distillate to work
Yeah,
with.
they're doing their own thing, which is cool. We'll review the 101 proof that we got today, and like I said, in Georgetown, Texas, they had a full rack of it. So, and
I was incredulous when you told me that.
yeah, what's today? Thursday. Yeah, so it's
To
not
be
like
fair, it is a Thursday.
yeah, but it's not like I'm picking days because I know when things are dropping. You know, just like last time we did a review that we got a bunch of whiskey. I went on a Friday. Like I don't know. Like I'm being a normal guy. I'm being
That's good. At least in
being
the
a normal
Austin,
shopper.
at least in the Austin area, except for the consortium of 5 guys who attend my church. Whiskey seems to be a neglected art form.
Yeah, well, in Dallas where we lived, obviously we had people that knew what was dropping when it was dropping, which is kind of disheartening. So, you know, the fact that we're playing this game like every other normal person, which is the whole point of this, well, of what we're doing.
This project, yes.
Yeah, this project, we're just talking about whiskey and stuff we can find.
Would you say that Old Forester 1910 is among your favorite finished bourbons?
Yeah, that with the Woodford Double Oaked was probably my favorite, and I would suggest it's really hard to find, but it's right behind me. What is it?
Peerless?
The Peerless Double Oaked.
Peerless is fantastic. However, you have to
The
go on an epic quest to find a bottle of
The
Peerless.
problem with that is unless you get lucky, you know, at 100 and I think it's 110 proof. I don't know what it is. The Double Oaked. I think it's 110 proof. Is that 108? Can you read that? I need my glasses.
Don't waste your time. You
I
can't
know.
see it anyway.
I was gonna bring them out here for this.
You really should.
Is it 108?
108.3.
Yeah. So the bump up in proof, and we have a backup by the way, because
A good thing.
because it's so good.
One of the few unopened bottles.
Yeah. Well,
Whereas this is only sitting at 93 proof.
Yeah, I think where the Peerless really jumps out is because it's got a higher proof, and I know we just did the Lucky 7 Double Oak.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's a higher proof,
Oh, good.
I don't think for the price it's a better product than the Peerless Double Oak, but the Peerless Double Oak is really hard to find.
Peerless is a cocky name, but it really does earn it.
You know, they're really good, you know.
But like I said, you have to go on an epic quest. You have to.
And you gotta get lucky. I mean, honestly, you have to get lucky.
I mean, with how hard those bottles are to find, you have better luck going and slaying a dragon.
Yeah, for the most part, it's tough to find, but if you can find it, you know, the Peerless Double Oaked is probably, which is why for the most part, like even with the Woodford Double Oaked that I've had multiple opportunities to buy, I passed on it, and the only reason being is that it's $150 bottle at 90 proof, and I'm like, I love what you're doing. But if you're charging me $150 for a 90 proof whiskey, that's basically I'm gonna open once.
I don't want to spend so much on the water that you put in it. You know.
Right. Well, if you think about it, I paid less for 2 of those Peerless Double Oaks at 108 proof. Did I just say that or not?
That's 108.3.
Okay. So yeah, I got hit in the head a lot. So I paid less for 2 bottles of that than I would for the Woodford Double Oak. Now I know it's a different product, but when you're looking
I've
at
heard of the Woodford Double Oak.
yeah, it came out. It was expensive though. It was $150 a bottle. It was distillery only for the longest time. So you could only get it if you were in Kentucky, which is cool.
That would probably be the only circumstance where you would buy it, huh? If you were at the Woodford distillery.
Yeah, I probably, all intents and purposes, I probably would have bought it just because it was a distillery only. But at 150 for 90 proof, and I think that's the thing with this economy, right? Is that you have to think of, you know, value for the whiskey that you're buying. And then you have to think about the enjoyment that you're going to get from it.
Speaking of which, when the economy gets better, will you switch your daily drinker, or do you think you're going to keep it at Old Forester?
No, for me, I'll keep it at Old Forester 100 just because I love the flavor profile. It's something. What is interesting to me is if I can sit with this bottle. Excuse me, allergies in Texas are fun. I can sit with this bottle. Yeah, I know, right? I can sit with this bottle, and I can pick it apart if I want, right? And you can go on any website, and you can have people give you 8,000 different freaking tasting notes, right? So you can do that with this bottle. 2, you can just have it as just a great everyday drinker.
Something that adds to the experience of whatever you happen to be doing while drinking it. Could be a conversation, could be watching Ocean's 11.
Could be anything. It could be anything. But at the end of the day, it's just a great whiskey. It drinks well. If you don't want to think about it, you don't have to, because it's just a great bourbon, right?
But if you want to, it's there.
It's there. And then 3, if you've got people coming over and you got the big bottle down there, big bottle's 40, let's call it $50, right? If people want a whiskey and cola,
you can dump it in there and you won't.
It's not going to hurt you, right?
Whereas if you only had, I don't know, if you only had High West, like anything from High West.
Sure, or even the new Redwood Empire we just bought for $50. Mm-hmm. If you want to mix that with cola, that's going to be a problem. I'm going to turn you on to something else, right? But for this whiskey, it's like, if you can kind of have it whichever way you want. If you want to drink it neat, great. If you want to drink it on ice, great. If you want to mix it with a cocktail,
it's very versatile.
It's very versatile. And some people that I've seen, they like the 86 more than the 100. Fair.
Same juice, just watered down.
Fair, just watered down.
Which is fine.
Yeah, for me, I'd rather water it down myself. So if you can take 100 proof, great. If you want to, I still think for the value, if you want to take 100 proof and you want to water it down, knock your socks off, because now you're getting more value out of the bottle.
For $2 more.
Right. And it's literally a couple dollars more.
A couple dollars more for the same volume. So
yeah.
if you math it out, it's probably like a couple cents per volume more.
Sure.
Or like fractions of a cent.
Sure. Now, if you're entertaining a lot of people at $50 a bottle for a 175,
well, then you might have to get yourself some very old Barton.
You might want to rethink, get some very old Barton, and which is a great whiskey in itself. For what it is, and they make a very old Barton 100.
Do they really?
They do.
I haven't tried a very old Barton 100.
You know what? Believe it or not, neither have I.
Really?
Neither have I.
Maybe we should remedy that.
We should remedy that, but it only comes in, at least one at the store I worked at, it only comes in the 175s. But at least they're glass 175s.
Well, to be fair, you're not buying it in anything smaller.
No, not for something like that. And I think.
I know their market. That'd be like if they sold box wine in boxes that just so happen to be 750.
It's the same idea.
It's like you're missing the point.
It's the same idea, yeah. Yeah, so the very old Barton, God bless them, the 100 proof, I'm willing to try. I just haven't tried it yet, just because there's so many other options out there. But for like a well whiskey, I'd probably go with a very old Barton. But if you've got just a little more money to spend, you want to entertain your guests, you want them to drink something really good, an Old Forester 100 is perfect, just because depending what you do, it's one of those whiskeys that you can literally, with whiskey snobs or whatever, I mean, unless they're just like complete dicks, right? But with a lot of,
unless they're no fun at all.
Unless they're no fun at all, they'll have fun with a 100 proof Old Forester, especially if it's free, right? If you want to make cocktails with it, it's a fantastic cocktail mixer. If somebody wants to mix it with, soda or diet soda or whatever, at $50 for a 175 and you're entertaining, that's not the end of the world. You know, you don't have to go to the $25 or the $30 bottle of, you know, the bottom shelf that comes in a plastic container, you know, and you're like, all right, fucker, here you go. you
For just a smidge more, you can treat your guests better.
You can treat your guests better. And then perhaps, just perhaps, at the end of the night, maybe not, but maybe at the beginning of the night, you know, they'll be like, oh, this cocktail is the best cocktail I've ever drank.
Very good point.
And you can be like, well, it's because you're drinking a better bourbon. You're not drinking a rot gut, you know, and, you know, maybe drink a little bit less and have fun. And especially with the proof being 100 proof, you know, a lot of people, you know, instead of having 5 or 6 cocktails, might have 2 or 3. They get to the same place.
And you know that's kinder to your guests. They're not inundated with a bunch of sugar from the simple syrup. So really you owe it to your guests.
So technically it's healthier. If we're gonna get healthier, technically it's healthier than drinking, you know, kind of bottom shelf stuff. But I'm a huge, that's my wheelhouse, and everybody's gonna be different. It could be some sort of a Jim Beam product. It could, you know, you could just drink Old Granddad 100.
Or Old Granddad 114.
Or if you like the proof a little higher, Old Granddad 114. You know, and especially if you're going low, you know, if you're going budget kind of thing. And in this world, it's not the worst thing because, you know, everybody has X amount of money to spend on things.
And the heart of the matter is there's plenty of good bourbons, there's plenty of good rye whiskeys for a reasonable price.
No, absolutely. You just have to know how to find them, and you have to know, you know, hopefully, you know, you've got a good person at the store that you shop at that's not going to steer you in the wrong direction.
You also have to be willing to look past the screw cap.
Yeah, which is funny because the screw cap I actually like more than the friggin' cork or the synthetic cork.
Well, less can go wrong with the screw cap as opposed to the cork, but importantly, it does feel cheap.
It does feel cheap, absolutely. You know, and they do go bad, but for the most part, you keep a screw top on there, you're pretty much good to go.
I think that's the heart of the matter. The screw top is fine because it never lasts that long.
Yeah, and then the nice thing is you never have to flip your bottles. So in my collection, I have to flip my bottles, you know, about once every 6 months, you know, just to keep the cork wet.
Whereas doing that with the screw top was a complete waste.
I just completely wasted my time. Yeah, but I did it for you, so you're welcome. And yeah, it's just, you know, Old Forester for me, at least for my palate, and everybody's going to be different, and everybody's going to have their favorites, whether it be a Jim Beam or, you know, a Lux Row, or it could be a Heaven Hill product. You know, you're going to find the flavor that you like, and every distillery has their base products that probably is going to satisfy you in what you're looking for. Like if you're looking for a nutty whiskey, something that's got a little bit of that nuttiness flavor, you know, you're going to go Jim Beam, you're going to go Heaven Hill, right? You're going to go 1792 Barton, and that's just, and there's nothing wrong with that. For me personally, my favorite is an Old Forester base. I've done experiments with other whiskeys where I've mixed it with Old Forester 100 and had a lot of fun with that, because Old Forester to me is just great whiskey. It's just great. Like there's, you know, you can like different things, and you can like the different, like you pointed out earlier with the Statesman and the Whiskey Row series. You know, you can step up from there, which is what I love Old Forester for.
It provides a solid foundation.
Yeah, where like a lot of people that I had that come in the store were like, I like Elijah Craig, where do I go from here? And it's like, well, if you want to stay with Elijah Craig and Heaven Hill, like, okay, you can go the Heaven Hill Bottle and Bond. But if you're an Elijah Craig fan, like, you have nowhere to go except for, you know, sort of their LE releases, their limited editions, right? Their barrel proofs.
Or a random store pick.
Or different, you know, single barrel store picks, which, like, you know, from what I've seen lately, are like $90 a bottle. And you're used to drinking a $35 bottle, And you're
That's a big jump.
like, well, I love Elijah Craig at 94 proof. I'd love to try it at 100 and, 10, 115, 120, 130 proof, but I don't want to spend that extra, money on it, because now we're talking, it's, some of the Elijah Craig stuff, you're going to get 65, $70 depending at the store you're at, if not more. And then some of the single barrel selects, because the barrels are so expensive, you're close to $100 a bottle. And so if you're used to a $35 bottle, and now you got to go to $100,
That's a big jump.
you're like, do I really like Elijah Craig that much? But
Whereas Old Forester is a little more forgiving as far as that.
sure, because you've got room to grow, and that's what I used to tell people, especially beginners. I'd start them off with an 86. I'm like, if you like that, go to 100. And if you like that, then step up to the Whiskey Row series, right? Step up to the Statesman at a 95 proof, which is a special whiskey. And then go through the whole line if you want, all the way up to the 1920, which is basically barrel strength at 115 proof. And then from there, if you really like it, and you really want to spend the money, then you go in the Old Forester birthday bourbons. They've got a presidential series.
Well, if you're willing to sell your soul to even find those.
Sure, and you're going to pay a lot of money for them. Or if, I know last year they came out with a 1924, which is,
Oh yeah, I heard about that.
yeah, which is hyper aged.
I actually saw a bottle of that in Asa Corey's raffle cabinet.
Yeah, it's expensive, and it's hyper allocated, and maybe eventually. So the whole thing with the 1924 series, and we'll be done with this soon, but the 1924 series is, so when, and this is a fun fact that a lot of people don't know, they think it's Old Forester because it says Old Forester. But when Old Forester, they sold Evan Williams.
They did?
Yep, they sold the brand name.
I didn't know
Because
that.
they owned it. But they were still
Old
under
Forester or Brown Foreman?
Brown Foreman.
Okay.
So, and then they still were under contract to produce for the Evan Williams line. So when you see Evan Williams, you're basically drinking Brown Foreman, but you're drinking, that particular mash bill, right?
Yeah.
So, but what they did, which was interesting, is they somehow managed to figure out how to keep and produce, this is years, like 15 years ago, how to keep the Evan Williams line in their portfolio. So the 1924 is an interesting product because it's basically the King of Kentucky stock.
Really?
Yeah, so King of Kentucky is a Brown Foreman product,
Yes, it is.
but it's the Evan Williams mash bill,
Oh, okay.
right? So it's just hyper aged. It's, 14, 15, 16-year-old whiskey that they've been sitting on, right? So when 1924 came out, basically what they did is they took the rejected barrels from the King of Kentucky line, which if you can find it at retail,
I hear it's quite impressive.
it's $200 some odd dollars a bottle. That's retail, right? So you can imagine what secondary is on that stuff.
I'd rather not.
But what they did was they kind of started the whole thing, and we'll go into Russell's real quick before we end this. They took the rejected King of Kentucky barrels, and then they basically took that and blended it with Old Forester. And then they came out with the 1924, right? So that's why 1924 is so good, right? So
Because it's rejected barrels.
it's rejected King of Kentucky barrels that didn't make that cutoff, right? And the tasters were like, no, this isn't ready for this, but they got to get dumped,
Of course.
right? So brilliant marketing. It came out, I think it was January. What year is this? 25.
It is.
So it was January of 24 that we got our first case in, and I saw a bottle and I looked at it, and for the price point, I'm like, I'll let somebody else buy it. Like, I wasn't that dick salesman that just bought it, that hit it and bought it. But I wish I would have, in a way, because I wanted to taste it.
I wish you would have.
Yeah, and I've never tasted it. So let's go back to the Russells. So Russell's 15 was the same idea.
Okay.
15-year-old Russell's Reserve, right? Wild turkey. Well, what do you do with the rejected barrels? Like the barrels that don't make the cut for the Russell's 15, what do you do with them? They dumped them back into the Russell's 10 barrels.
Oh.
So there was a while, though, with the LLME barcode on the bottom of the Russell's 10-year that I'd have people coming in, and I'll never forget the day. This dude's got a bottle, he's looking up to the light, and he's like, and I'm like,
What the God screeners
like,
are you doing?
bro, what are you doing? I'm like, what are you looking for? And he told me, this is before it kind of hit the internet, at least from what I had learned. And
Before it hit the mainstream.
Yeah, before it hit the mainstream. And I'm like, oh, that's what you're doing. You're looking, because what they did is they took the rejected Russell's 15 barrels, like however many there were, and they dumped them into Russell's 10. But it was under a particular batch that they did. And in the Russell's world, it was, however they did it, it was the LLME batch. So for months, I had people coming in, going right to the Russell's 10. And I did it today when I went to, I did it today when I went to the store. And I looked at the damn barcode, because I'm like, maybe, and this is a year out, I'm like, maybe they got it. But yeah, so you get those ultra hyper aged whiskeys that, didn't, in the Wild Turkey world or the Old Forester world, they didn't make the cut, but they still got to use them, right? And so they use them in something else. And then all of a sudden, those particular offerings become like hyper exclusive, and they're like, everybody's looking for those. And although I never got to try it, everybody that tried it, LLME, Russell's 10 was like, dude, these are so
life-changing.
They're so much better. And that's fair, because you're like, well, you're using, if in the case of a Russell's 15, you're using 15-year-old whiskey. Like, it doesn't suck.
Especially since it's Russell's.
Right. It's a Wild Turkey product. It just didn't make the cut for this particular brand. So what are we going to do with the rest of these barrels? So let's dump them into the 10-year, right? So that's kind of what Old Forester did with the 1924, except where Wild Turkey just dumped them into the 10-year for that one particular release, right, that everybody had to search for. Old Forester made a whole different product, which, to be fair, is pretty damn smart.
It's very smart.
In my opinion.
And Brown Foreman, they're professionals over there.
Yeah, because, you're not searching for barcodes.
No.
If you see a 1924...
It's purple, you know what it is.
Yeah, you see a 1924 sitting on the shelf, you're like, oh crap, that's a 1924.
You do a backflip when you see it.
Right, and at this point in time in my life, if I saw one sitting on the shelf at 100 and, I think at the time it was 115 or 125 or whatever, or 150 even, I'd probably buy it.
You really should have scooped it up when you
I should have, but I was being a good salesperson and wasn't a jerk.
A better man than me.
Yeah, that's fair. I should have bought it, because I haven't tried it, and they're so hard to find that it would be.
Hell, you could have justified it by saying that whoever bought it was just going to flip it and sell it on secondary.
Yeah, that's fair too. I don't know. At least the people that came in and bought the last two bottles, at least it looked like they were genuinely excited.
That's good. Hey, water under the bridge.
Yeah.
In closing, Old Forester 100.
Yeah,
You like it?
Yeah, for a daily, that's my favorite. Everybody's different, everybody's palate's different, but for me, Old Forester 100 is just a solid, daily. Obviously don't drink it daily.
Unless you want to.
Take a few days off. We don't want any problems, because we want to enjoy this. We don't want it to become a problem, but.
Second, it becomes a crutch.
Yeah,
It's a bad spot.
Just enjoy it. have your fun. You know, keep it under control, obviously, but yeah, Old Forester for me, you know, this is a sweet spot in my heart, which is kind of a bummer that we're doing it this early in all the videos that we're doing because, you know, it's one of those things. I mean, Buffalo Trace got me into the game, but Old Forester kind of got me hooked. You know, I was a big fan of Buffalo Trace before it got popular, and then Old Forester just kind of spoke to me. It just, for me, it hit all the flavor profiles, and then we went through the Whiskey Row series. You know, I haven't tried birthday bourbon or, you know, the president's stuff or any of that stuff, but, you know,
Tell you what,
their normal offerings are just so damn good.
don't be sad, old man. If we ever do a final episode, or maybe it'll be like an anniversary episode or something, and we happen to come across one of those bottles, we'll make sure it's an Old Forester birthday bourbon.
Yeah,
or Old Forester presidential.
We'll do something.
If anything, it's better that we cover this so early because this is the foundation of this.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's so scary about all this. Is, you know, I started, I mean, it's, yeah, you might know this, but obviously I do. I started with Buffalo Trace and Jameson.
Yep.
You know, those are my two whiskeys that I got involved with, and
Humble beginnings.
I just, you know, Buffalo. I mean, it sounds cliche because it's Buffalo Trace, but you know, back in the day, Buffalo Trace was just available everywhere.
It was.
And
Still.
for whatever reason, Jameson, maybe because I'm Irish, because we're Irish, you know, it just hit a sweet spot, you know, and then I learned about Bushmills and, you know, Redbreast and Green Spot and Powers and everything else after that. But for me, Buffalo Trace and Jameson are still my, you know, it's my heart. But the bourbon that really got me and just kind of hooked me was this damn whiskey.